Captain Sarah Martinez stood at the edge of the tarmac, her eyes scanning the row of aircraft lined up for the morning briefing. The desert sun was already beating down mercilessly at 600 hours, and the other pilots were gathering around the sleek F-16 Fighting Falcons and the imposing A-10 Thunderbolts. These were the machines that commanded respect, the ones that made hearts race and enemies tremble. But Sarah's gaze lingered on something different. At the far end of the line sat a peculiar aircraft that most of her colleagues dismissed without a second thought. It was smaller than the fighters, with an unusual design that didn't fit the traditional mold of military aviation. The other pilots called it the odd duck or the experimental toy. To them, it was just another piece of equipment that didn't belong in serious combat operations. Lieutenant Jake Thompson was the first to notice where she was looking. He nudged his buddy, Captain Rick Owen, and smirked. "Look at Martinez staring at that thing again," he said loud enough for others to hear. "I swear she's obsessed with that weird little bird." Rick chuckled and shook his head. "Someone needs to tell her this is the real military, not some experimental playground. We fly real jets here, not science projects." The comment drew laughter from several nearby pilots who had overheard the conversation. Sarah had heard these types of comments before, but they still stung. She had been studying that particular aircraft for months, reading every technical manual she could get her hands on, and analyzing its capabilities. While others saw an awkward design, she saw potential that nobody else seemed to recognize. The aircraft had features that could revolutionize modern warfare, but convincing her peers of that seemed impossible. Major David Chen, the squadron leader, called everyone to attention for the daily briefing. As the pilots gathered in a semicircle, Sarah found herself standing slightly apart from the group. She had earned her place among these elite aviators through years of rigorous training and exceptional performance, but moments like these made her feel like an outsider. "Today's mission parameters are straightforward," Major Chen announced, pointing to the tactical display behind him. "We have intelligence suggesting enemy movement in Sector 7. Standard reconnaissance and possible engagement protocols apply." He paused and looked around the group. "I need volunteers for the advanced scouting mission." Several hands shot up immediately, including Jake's and Rick's. They were eager to take their F-16s out for what promised to be an exciting sortie. Sarah raised her hand as well, but when Major Chen's eyes met hers, she saw a flicker of uncertainty. "Martinez, what aircraft are you planning to take?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Sir, I'd like to request the XH-47, Sarah replied confidently, using the official designation for the aircraft that had become the subject of so much ridicule. The response was immediate. Several pilots exchanged glances and barely suppressed snickers. Jake didn't bother hiding his amusement. "Come on, Sarah, this is a real mission, not a test flight for experimental junk." Rick joined in, his voice dripping with condescension. "Maybe you should stick to something proven, something that won't leave you stranded in enemy territory when it inevitably breaks down." Even Major Chen seemed hesitant. "Martinez, I appreciate your enthusiasm for new technology, but perhaps a more conventional choice would be appropriate for today's mission." Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and frustration. She had spent countless hours studying the XH-47's capabilities, and she knew it was perfectly suited for the type of reconnaissance mission they were discussing. Its advanced stealth capabilities and unique sensor array could provide intelligence that traditional aircraft simply couldn't gather. "With respect, sir," Sarah said, maintaining her composure despite the mockery around her, "the XH-47 has capabilities that would be ideal for this mission profile." "Capabilities like what?" Jake challenged, crossing his arms. "Looking weird? Flying slow? Because that's about all I've seen it do." The laughter that followed was the final blow to Sarah's confidence for the moment. She could see that arguing further would only make things worse. Major Chen, clearly wanting to avoid further conflict, made his decision. "Thompson, Owen, you're on the scouting mission. Take the F-16s and maintain standard communication protocols." He looked at Sarah with what might have been sympathy. "Martinez, you're on standby for support operations." As the group dispersed to prepare for their respective missions, Sarah remained on the tarmac, watching her colleagues head toward their aircraft with obvious excitement. She felt a mixture of disappointment and determination burning in her chest. They didn't understand what they were dismissing so casually. Walking slowly toward the XH-47, Sarah ran her hand along its smooth, angular hull. To others it might look strange or incomplete, but to her it represented the future of military aviation. She had seen the classified reports about its test performances, the capabilities that were kept hidden from most personnel. The aircraft's designation had a nickname that only a few people knew about, a name that was whispered in certain circles but never spoken aloud in mixed company. Sarah had heard it once, overheard in a conversation between two high-ranking officers who didn't know she was listening. They had called it the Ghosthawk. The name sent a chill down her spine every time she thought about it. There was something ominous and powerful about that designation, something that suggested this aircraft was far more than the experimental toy her colleagues believed it to be. As she stood there in the blazing desert sun, Sarah made a silent promise to herself. Someday she would prove them all wrong. Someday they would understand that their mockery was directed at something far more dangerous and capable than they could imagine. The sound of jet engines firing up in the distance reminded her that while others were flying their missions, she was stuck on the ground. But Sarah had a feeling that her time would come sooner than anyone expected. 3 weeks had passed since the humiliating briefing, and Sarah's obsession with the XH-47 had only grown stronger. Every spare moment she had was spent in the aircraft maintenance hangar, studying the machine that everyone else ignored. The maintenance crew had grown accustomed to her presence, though they seemed just as puzzled by her interest as the other pilots. Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez, a grizzled veteran with 30 years of service, watched Sarah examining the aircraft's unusual wing configuration for the 3rd time that week. He approached her with a curious expression, wiping his hands on an oil-stained rag. "You know, Captain," Rodriguez said, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "In all my years working on military aircraft, I've never seen anything quite like this one." Sarah looked up from the technical manual she was reading. "What do you mean, Chief?" Rodriguez glanced around the hangar to make sure they were alone before continuing. "Well, for starters, the materials used in its construction aren't standard military issue. The hull composition is something I've never encountered before. It's lighter than aluminum but stronger than titanium. And the engine configuration," he paused, shaking his head, "it's like nothing I've ever worked on." "Have you been able to run full diagnostics on it?" Sarah asked, her interest piqued. "That's the strange part," Rodriguez replied, lowering his voice. "Most of the diagnostic systems can't interface with it properly. It's like it's operating on a completely different technological level. The computer systems are so advanced that our standard equipment can barely communicate with them." Sarah felt a thrill of excitement mixed with apprehension. Everything Rodriguez was telling her confirmed her suspicions that this aircraft was far more advanced than anyone realized. She had noticed irregularities in the technical specifications, but hearing it from someone with Rodriguez's experience made it real. "Chief, have you ever heard anyone refer to this aircraft by a different name?" Sarah asked carefully. Rodriguez's expression changed immediately. His eyes darted around the hangar again, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Where did you hear that?" "Hear what?" Sarah pressed, though she could see that Rodriguez knew exactly what she was referring to. "Listen, Captain," Rodriguez said, moving closer. "There are things about this aircraft that are classified way above both our pay grades. I've been working on military equipment for 3 decades, and I've learned that some questions are better left unasked." But Sarah couldn't let it go. "Chief, I need to know. Is there more to this aircraft than what's in the official documentation?" Rodriguez looked at her for a long moment as if weighing his options. Finally, he sighed and gestured for her to follow him to a quieter corner of the hangar. "What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this hangar, understood?" Sarah nodded eagerly. "About 6 months ago, a team of technicians arrived here from some classified facility. They spent 2 weeks working on that aircraft, installing equipment that wasn't in any manual I've ever seen. When they left, they took all their tools and documentation with them. But I overheard one of them talking to his partner." "What did you hear?" Sarah asked, her heart racing. "He said they were finishing the Ghosthawk modification," Rodriguez whispered. "Said something about it being ready for operational deployment soon." The name hit Sarah like a physical blow. Ghosthawk. There it was again. The mysterious designation she had heard in that overheard conversation weeks ago. But now it was connected to modifications and operational deployment, which meant this aircraft wasn't just experimental anymore. Chief, do you know what kind of modifications they made? Rodriguez shook his head. They were very careful about keeping their work hidden, but I noticed they were working extensively on the sensor array and something in the weapons bay that I couldn't identify. Whatever they installed, it wasn't standard equipment. Sarah spent the rest of the afternoon absorbing this information. If Rodriguez was right, then the XH-47 wasn't just an experimental aircraft gathering dust. It was a fully operational machine with capabilities that were being deliberately hidden from most personnel. That evening, Sarah decided to do something that was technically within her authority, but would certainly raise eyebrows. She submitted a formal request to Major Chen for permission to conduct a solo familiarization flight in the XH-47. As a qualified test pilot with clearance for experimental aircraft, she had the right to make such a request, but she knew it would be met with skepticism. The response came the next morning. Major Chen called her into his office with the expression that was equal parts confusion and concern. "Martinez, I have to ask," Major Chen said, leaning back in his chair. "What exactly are you trying to prove with this request?" "Sir, I believe the XH-47 has capabilities that could be valuable to our squadron. I'd like the opportunity to evaluate its performance firsthand." Major Chen studied her for a moment. "You realize that flying an experimental aircraft solo carries significant risks, and frankly, I'm not sure what operational value it would provide. With respect, sir, how can we determine its operational value without proper evaluation?" Sarah countered. Major Chen sighed and pulled out a thick folder from his desk drawer. "Sarah, I'm going to be straight with you. This aircraft isn't exactly what it appears to be. There are aspects of its development and capabilities that are classified beyond my clearance level." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "What do you mean, sir?" "I mean that while you see an experimental aircraft, others see something entirely different. There have been inquiries from higher command about pilot assignments for this aircraft. Inquiries that suggest it may have a very specific operational purpose. Are you saying it's not experimental?" Sarah asked. Major Chen looked at her carefully. "I'm saying that experimental might not be the right word anymore." He paused, then made a decision. "Your request is approved, but with conditions. You'll have a full technical briefing before the flight, and you'll be accompanied by an observer." Sarah's excitement was tempered by curiosity about who this observer would be and what they might know about the aircraft's true capabilities. As she left Major Chen's office, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to discover something that would change everything she thought she knew about the XH-47. The Ghosthawk was about to reveal its secrets, and Sarah would be the first pilot outside of the classified program to experience what it was truly capable of. The morning of Sarah's scheduled flight arrived with an unusual level of activity around the hangar. She arrived early to find several unfamiliar personnel conducting what appeared to be final preparations on the XH-47. These weren't the regular maintenance crew she had grown accustomed to seeing. These technicians moved with the precision and secrecy of people working on classified projects. Colonel Amanda Hayes was waiting for Sarah near the aircraft, her crisp uniform bearing insignia that Sarah didn't immediately recognize. The colonel was a tall woman with sharp eyes that seemed to take in every detail of her surroundings. When she spoke, her voice carried an authority that made it clear she wasn't someone to be questioned lightly. "Captain Martinez," Colonel Hayes said, extending her hand. "I'm your observer for today's flight. I trust Major Chen briefed you on the conditions of this exercise?" "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied, shaking the colonel's hand and noting the firmness of her grip. "Though I have to admit, I'm curious about your background with this aircraft." Colonel Hayes smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Let's just say I have significant experience with advanced aircraft systems. Today's flight will be educational for both of us." As they approached the XH-47, Sarah noticed immediate differences from her previous examinations. The aircraft seemed more alive somehow, with subtle lights and indicators that hadn't been active before. The mysterious modifications that Chief Rodriguez had mentioned were apparently now fully operational. "Before we begin," Colonel Hayes said, pulling out a tablet with technical specifications, "there are some capabilities of this aircraft that weren't included in the standard documentation you've been studying." Sarah's heart raced with anticipation. "What kind of capabilities?" "The XH-47 incorporates stealth technology that's several generations ahead of anything currently deployed. Its radar signature is virtually undetectable, and its infrared suppression systems can make it invisible to heat-seeking detection methods. This was far beyond what Sarah had imagined. She had suspected the aircraft was more advanced than it appeared. But true next-generation stealth capabilities were something she hadn't dared to hope for. Colonel Hayes continued. Additionally, the sensor array includes electromagnetic surveillance equipment that can intercept and analyze enemy communications in real time. The aircraft can essentially become an invisible spy in the sky. Ma'am, if these capabilities are real, why isn't this aircraft being used operationally? Sarah asked. Who says it isn't? Colonel Hayes replied cryptically. Today's flight will help determine if we have the right pilot for its operational deployment. The implications of that statement hit Sarah like a thunderbolt. This wasn't just a familiarization flight. It was an evaluation. Someone was considering her for operational missions in an aircraft that was apparently far more important than anyone at the base realized. The pre-flight briefing revealed even more surprises. The XH-47's flight characteristics were unlike anything Sarah had encountered. It could operate at extremely low altitudes without being detected, could hover silently like a helicopter when needed, and had a range that exceeded most fighter aircraft despite its smaller size. The most important thing to remember, Colonel Hayes explained as they prepared to board, is that this aircraft responds differently to pilot input than conventional jets. It has adaptive flight systems that learn your flying patterns and can anticipate your needs. Some pilots find this unsettling at first. Sarah strapped herself into the pilot's seat and was immediately struck by how different the cockpit was from any aircraft she had flown before. The displays were holographic rather than traditional screens, and the controls seemed to respond to her touch before she had even activated them. Ready for startup sequence? Colonel Hayes asked from the observer seat behind her. Ready, Sarah confirmed, though her hands were trembling slightly with excitement and nervousness. The moment Sarah initiated the startup sequence, she understood why this aircraft had seemed so mysterious. Instead of the familiar roar of jet engines, the XH-47 came to life with a barely audible hum. The power indicators showed full operational status, but the sound signature was so minimal that it was almost eerie. Tower. This is Ghosthawk requesting clearance for departure, Colonel Hayes said into her headset. Sarah's eyes widened. There it was again, that name, but this time it wasn't whispered or overheard. It was being used as the aircraft's official call sign. Ghosthawk, you are cleared for departure. Maintain flight plan parameters and report status every 15 minutes. As Sarah lifted the aircraft off the tarmac, she immediately noticed that it flew unlike anything she had ever experienced. The controls were incredibly responsive, almost intuitive. It was as if the aircraft was reading her intentions and adjusting its performance accordingly. Take us to 500 feet and engage stealth mode, Colonel Hayes instructed. Sarah found the stealth activation control and was amazed by what happened next. The aircraft seemed to disappear from its own radar display, and the outside world took on a different quality as the electromagnetic signature vanished. Congratulations, Captain, Colonel Hayes said with what sounded like genuine approval. You're now flying an aircraft that's completely invisible to enemy detection systems. As far as the world below is concerned, we simply don't exist. For the next hour, Sarah put the XH-47 through various maneuvers and tests. Every capability Colonel Hayes had described proved to be real and even more impressive than advertised. The aircraft could accelerate silently to incredible speeds, could hover motionless for extended periods, and could change direction so quickly that it seemed to defy physics. But the most remarkable moment came when Colonel Hayes activated the surveillance systems. Suddenly, Sarah could see and hear enemy communications from a training exercise happening 50 miles away. The aircraft was intercepting radio traffic, analyzing tactical data, and providing real-time intelligence that would have been impossible to gather through conventional means. Now you understand, Colonel Hayes said as they headed back to base. This isn't just an experimental aircraft. It's a game changer. The question is, are you ready to be part of something that will redefine modern warfare? As Sarah guided the Ghosthawk back toward the landing strip, she realized that her colleague's mockery was about to become completely irrelevant. She was being offered the opportunity to fly the most advanced military aircraft ever created, and everything about her career was about to change. 2 days after her evaluation flight, Sarah received orders that changed everything. She was to report to a classified briefing room at 500 hours, with instructions to tell no one about the meeting. The secrecy surrounding her new assignment was unlike anything she had experienced in her military career. The briefing room was located in a section of the base that Sarah had never accessed before. Armed guards checked her credentials twice before allowing her entry into a sterile, windowless chamber where Colonel Hayes was waiting alongside two other officers she didn't recognize. "Captain Martinez," Colonel Hayes began without preamble, "what I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. You've been selected for a mission that could determine the outcome of a critical international situation." Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she took her seat at the small conference table. The weight of the moment was palpable, and she could sense that her life was about to take a dramatic turn. General Patricia Morrison, a woman whose reputation for strategic brilliance was legendary throughout the military, stepped forward to address Sarah directly. "Captain, we have a situation developing in the eastern Mediterranean that requires immediate and covert intervention. Intelligence suggests that a hostile nation has established a hidden weapons facility on a remote island. Traditional reconnaissance methods have failed to penetrate their defenses." The third officer, who introduced himself as Commander David Park from Naval Intelligence, activated a holographic display that showed satellite imagery of a seemingly barren island surrounded by choppy waters. "The facility is protected by the most advanced air defense systems ever deployed," Commander Park explained. "Any conventional aircraft approaching within 50 miles would be detected and destroyed. Satellite surveillance has been ineffective due to sophisticated jamming equipment." Sarah studied the images, beginning to understand where this briefing was leading. "And you believe the Ghosthawk can penetrate these defenses?" "We don't believe it," General Morrison said firmly. "We know it can. The question is whether you're prepared to undertake a mission that will test every capability of that aircraft and your skills as a pilot." Colonel Hayes pulled out a detailed mission folder and placed it in front of Sarah. "The mission parameters are complex. You'll need to fly solo, penetrate the island's airspace undetected, conduct comprehensive surveillance of the facility, and return with intelligence that could prevent a potential international conflict. The flight will require you to maintain complete radio silence for over 4 hours," Commander Park added. "You'll be operating beyond the range of rescue operations. If something goes wrong, you'll be entirely on your own." Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and terror as she absorbed the magnitude of what they were asking her to do. This was the type of mission that could make or break a military career. The kind of operation that only the most elite pilots ever had the opportunity to undertake. "Ma'am, may I ask why I was selected for this mission?" Sarah asked, looking directly at General Morrison. "Because you're the only pilot who has demonstrated the intuitive understanding of the Ghosthawk's capabilities that this mission requires," the general replied. "Your evaluation flight showed that you have a natural affinity for the aircraft's advanced systems. More importantly, you've shown the determination and courage necessary for solo operations in hostile territory." Colonel Hayes opened the mission folder and began outlining the specific details. "You'll depart at 2300 hours tomorrow night, flying a route that will take you over international waters before approaching the target from the south. The island's defense systems are weakest from that direction, but you'll still need to rely entirely on the Ghosthawk's stealth capabilities." The technical aspects of the mission were staggering. Sarah would need to fly at extremely low altitudes to avoid detection, navigate using only passive sensors to prevent electronic signature detection, and conduct surveillance operations while remaining completely invisible to the most advanced military technology available. "The most critical phase," Commander Park explained, "will be the surveillance itself. You'll need to position the aircraft to gather visual and electronic intelligence on the facility's activities. The intelligence community believes they're developing weapons technology that could shift the balance of power in the region." "What kind of weapons?" Sarah asked, though she suspected the answer would be classified. General Morrison exchanged glances with the other officers before responding. "Let's just say that if our intelligence is correct, the international community has a compelling interest in understanding what's happening on that island." Sarah spent the next 2 hours studying every aspect of the mission plan. The route was complex, designed to avoid commercial air traffic and known military patrol areas. The timing was critical, coordinated with satellite coverage and intelligence on enemy patrol schedules. "Captain," Colonel Hayes said as the briefing concluded, "I need to emphasize that this mission is entirely voluntary. The risks are substantial, and the political implications are significant. If you choose to decline, there will be no negative impact on your career. Sarah looked around the room at the 3 officers who were waiting for her decision. She thought about the months of mockery from her fellow pilots, the countless hours she had spent studying the Ghosthawk, and the incredible capabilities she had experienced during her evaluation flight. "Ma'am, I accept the mission," Sarah said without hesitation. General Morrison smiled for the first time during the briefing. "Outstanding, Captain. Your courage and commitment will not be forgotten." As Sarah left the briefing room with her mission folder tucked securely under her arm, she realized that in less than 24 hours, she would be flying the most advanced aircraft ever created on a solo mission that could change the course of international events. The pilots who had mocked her choice of aircraft had no idea that their experimental toy was about to undertake one of the most important intelligence operations in recent history. The Ghosthawk was about to prove its worth in the most dramatic way possible, and Sarah would be the pilot to demonstrate its true capabilities to the world. The night air was crisp and clear as Sarah performed her final pre-flight checks on the Ghosthawk. The base was unusually quiet, with most personnel unaware that a critical intelligence mission was about to launch from their facility. Only a small team of technicians and officers knew what was happening in the shadows of the maintenance hangar. Colonel Hayes approached Sarah as she completed her external inspection of the aircraft. "Final intelligence update, Captain," she said, handing Sarah a sealed envelope. "Satellite imagery from 6 hours ago shows increased activity on the target island. Whatever they're doing there, they're accelerating their timeline." Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders as she accepted the updated intelligence. The mission that had seemed surreal during the briefing was now becoming very real, and the stakes were higher than ever. "Remember," Colonel Hayes continued, "complete radio silence until you're back in friendly airspace. The Ghosthawk's communication systems will record everything automatically, but you won't be able to transmit without risking detection." Sarah nodded and climbed into the cockpit, her hands moving through the startup sequence with the confidence that came from intensive preparation. The Ghosthawk responded immediately, its systems coming online with the same eerily quiet efficiency she had experienced during her evaluation flight. "Tower, Ghosthawk requesting clearance for departure on classified mission profile," Sarah transmitted, using the special authorization codes she had been given. "Ghosthawk, you are cleared for immediate departure. Good hunting, Captain." As Sarah lifted off into the darkness, she felt the familiar thrill of the Ghosthawk's incredible responsiveness. But tonight was different. Tonight she was flying alone into enemy territory with the most advanced military aircraft ever created, carrying the hopes of preventing an international crisis. The first phase of the mission involved a 2-hour flight over international waters, maintaining an altitude and speed that would keep her below the detection threshold of commercial radar systems. The Ghosthawk's stealth capabilities made this relatively straightforward, but Sarah remained vigilant for any signs of unexpected air traffic. As she approached the outer perimeter of the target area, Sarah activated the aircraft's full stealth mode. Immediately, the Ghosthawk seemed to disappear from reality itself. The radar signature vanished completely, the infrared suppression systems eliminated any heat trail, and even the sound dampening reached levels that made the aircraft practically silent. "Phase 2 commencing," Sarah whispered to herself, beginning the most dangerous part of the mission. The approach to the island required flying at an altitude of less than 50 feet above the water, using the natural radar shadows created by the wave patterns to mask any residual signature. The Ghosthawk's adaptive flight systems made this incredibly challenging maneuver feel almost routine, automatically adjusting for wind patterns and wave heights. 20 miles from the target, Sarah's passive sensors began detecting the edge of the island's defensive network. The sophistication of the systems was immediately apparent. Multiple radar installations were operating in coordinated sweeps, creating an overlapping detection grid that would have been impossible for conventional aircraft to penetrate. But the Ghosthawk wasn't conventional. As Sarah flew directly through the outer defensive perimeter, the aircraft remained completely invisible to the enemy systems. The advanced stealth technology was performing exactly as promised, rendering the most sophisticated air defenses useless. The island itself came into view as a dark mass against the horizon, with only a few scattered lights visible from her low-altitude approach. Sarah activated the Ghosthawk's surveillance, systems and was immediately rewarded with detailed imagery that revealed the true scope of the facility. Hidden on the island, what the intelligence community had suspected was confirmed in stunning detail. The island housed a massive underground complex, with multiple entry points disguised as natural rock formations. Heavy machinery was visible around several construction sites, and the electronic signatures detected by the Ghosthawk's sensors indicated the presence of advanced weapons technology. Sarah maneuvered the aircraft into a holding pattern that allowed the surveillance systems to gather comprehensive intelligence. The Ghosthawk's sensors were recording everything: visual imagery, electromagnetic signatures, communication intercepts, and detailed structural analysis of the facility. The most shocking discovery came when the electronic surveillance systems intercepted communications between the facility and an unknown command structure. The intercepted transmissions revealed that the weapons being developed were far more advanced and dangerous than intelligence estimates had suggested. As Sarah continued her surveillance, she noticed increased activity around one of the facility's main entrances. Multiple vehicles were moving with apparent urgency, and personnel were deploying additional defensive equipment. It appeared that despite the Ghosthawk's stealth capabilities, someone suspected that surveillance was being conducted. The mission parameters had called for 30 minutes of surveillance, but Sarah realized that the intelligence being gathered was so valuable that extending the operation might be worth the additional risk. The Ghosthawk systems were capturing data that could prevent a significant international threat. However, her tactical training reminded her that staying too long in enemy territory was one of the fastest ways to turn a successful mission into a disaster. After 45 minutes of comprehensive surveillance, Sarah made the decision to begin her withdrawal from the target area. As she turned the Ghosthawk away from the island and began her return journey, Sarah felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The mission had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. The aircraft had performed flawlessly, the intelligence gathered was extraordinary, and she had proven that the Ghosthawk was everything its designers had promised. But the most satisfying aspect of the mission was the knowledge that her fellow pilots' mockery had been directed at an aircraft that had just accomplished something impossible. While they slept in their bunks, dismissing the Ghosthawk as an experimental toy, she had used it to conduct one of the most successful intelligence operations in recent military history. The return flight would take another 2 hours, but Sarah knew that when she landed, everything would be different. The Ghosthawk would no longer be a mysterious experimental aircraft. It would be a proven combat system, and she would be the pilot who had demonstrated its true capabilities to the world. Sarah was 90 minutes into her return flight when everything changed. The Ghosthawk's passive sensors detected multiple aircraft launching from the island behind her, their flight patterns indicating they were conducting an aggressive search operation. Somehow, despite the aircraft's perfect stealth performance, the enemy had realized they had been under surveillance. The situation became critical when Sarah's long-range sensors picked up additional aircraft approaching from 2 other directions. It appeared that the enemy had activated a coordinated response involving multiple bases, creating a search net that was designed to intercept any aircraft that might have conducted surveillance of their facility. Sarah's training kicked in immediately. She reduced altitude to barely 20 feet above the water and increased speed while maintaining complete electronic silence. The Ghosthawk's stealth systems were still functioning perfectly, but the enemy was using a search pattern that didn't rely solely on radar detection. Through her encrypted communication system, Sarah could monitor the enemy search aircraft's radio traffic. What she heard made her blood run cold. They were conducting a systematic grid search using visual detection methods, flying low enough that stealth technology couldn't hide an aircraft from trained observers using night vision equipment. The enemy pilots were professional and methodical. They had divided the potential escape routes into sectors and were flying coordinated search patterns that would eventually cover every possible avenue of departure from the island. Sarah realized that no matter how advanced the Ghosthawk's stealth capabilities were, she was facing a situation where detection was becoming increasingly likely. Worse yet, the intercepted communications revealed that the enemy had contacted additional forces. Naval vessels were being positioned to block maritime escape routes, and additional aircraft were being scrambled from bases hundreds of miles away. The response was so massive that it suggested the facility's importance was even greater than intelligence estimates had indicated. Sarah, made a tactical decision that went against her. Mission parameters but might save her life and the critical intelligence she was carrying. Instead of maintaining her planned return route, she turned toward a known international shipping lane where commercial traffic might provide cover for her escape. The Ghosthawk's advanced navigation systems calculated a new route that would take her through areas of heavy maritime traffic, where the confusion of multiple radar signatures might mask her presence. But this route would add another hour to her return flight, extending her time in hostile territory well beyond safe parameters. As she flew toward the shipping lane, Sarah's sensors detected that the enemy search aircraft were expanding their pattern. They had apparently realized that their target had escaped the immediate area and were now conducting a wider search that would eventually intersect with her new route. The most dangerous moment came when Sarah was forced to fly directly beneath a formation of enemy interceptors. The Ghosthawk's stealth capabilities kept her invisible to their radar, but she was close enough to see the aircraft above her through the cockpit canopy. Any malfunction in the stealth systems would result in immediate detection and almost certain destruction. Sarah held her breath as the enemy formation passed overhead, their pilots completely unaware that the aircraft they were hunting was directly beneath them. The Ghosthawk's silence was so complete that even at close range, the enemy pilots couldn't detect her presence. But the enemy's persistence was creating a new problem. Their search pattern was so comprehensive that they were inadvertently herding Sarah toward a geographic choke point where detection would become unavoidable. She was running out of airspace that wasn't under active surveillance. The solution came from the Ghosthawk's most advanced capability, one that Sarah had only read about in the classified technical manuals. The aircraft's adaptive camouflage system could synchronize with commercial aircraft transponder signals, essentially disguising the Ghosthawk as a civilian airliner on radar screens. Sarah activated the transponder masking system just as a large cargo aircraft passed through the area on a routine commercial flight. Immediately, the Ghosthawk's electronic signature merged with that of the civilian aircraft, creating the illusion that only one plane was present in the airspace. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The enemy search aircraft began converging on the area, but their radar screens showed only a commercial cargo flight following a normal international route. Sarah flew in formation with the civilian aircraft, hidden within its radar shadow and protected by its legitimate presence in the airspace. For 20 tense minutes, Sarah maintained this deception while enemy interceptors flew search patterns around the commercial aircraft. The enemy pilots were clearly frustrated by their inability to locate their target, but they couldn't justify intercepting a legitimate civilian flight without creating an international incident. As the commercial aircraft continued on its route toward international airspace, Sarah gradually separated from it while maintaining the transponder masking. The Ghosthawk appeared to simply fade away from radar screens, as if it had never existed at all. Once she reached the safety of international waters, Sarah finally allowed herself to breathe normally. The mission had succeeded, but the aggressive enemy response suggested that the intelligence she was carrying was even more valuable than anyone had anticipated. The facility on the island was clearly involved in something that the enemy was desperate to keep secret. The final hour of her return flight was conducted at high altitude and maximum speed. The Ghosthawk's impressive range and efficiency meant that despite the extended time in hostile territory, she still had adequate fuel reserves to reach her home base safely. As Sarah approached the familiar lights of her base, she realized that she was returning from the most significant mission of her career. The intelligence she was carrying could prevent an international crisis, and she had proven that the Ghosthawk was capable of missions that no other aircraft could accomplish. But more than that, she had demonstrated that the ridicule and skepticism of her fellow pilots had been completely misplaced. The aircraft they had dismissed as an experimental toy had just completed one of the most challenging intelligence operations in military history, and she had been the pilot to prove its extraordinary capabilities. The landing approach felt surreal after hours of intense concentration and danger. As the Ghosthawk touched down on the familiar runway, Sarah knew that everything was about to change. The mission's success would validate not only the aircraft's advanced technology, but also her own judgment and courage in believing in its potential when everyone else had doubted. The debriefing took place at dawn, just hours after Sarah's successful return from the mission. General Morrison was present, along with Colonel Hayes and several other high-ranking officers whose presence indicated the extraordinary importance of the intelligence Sarah had gathered. The atmosphere in the secure briefing room was electric with anticipation. "Captain Martinez," General Morrison began, "preliminary analysis of the intelligence you gathered has exceeded our most optimistic expectations. The facility you surveilled represents a threat that we had significantly underestimated." Sarah felt a surge of pride and relief. The mission had been successful, and the risks she had taken were being validated by the quality of the intelligence she had brought back. But she could sense that there was more to come. Colonel Hayes activated the holographic display system and began showing the processed imagery from the Ghosthawk's surveillance systems. "What you captured, Captain, is evidence of weapons technology that could destabilize the entire region. Without this intelligence, we would have been completely unprepared for what's coming. The images were stunning in their clarity and detail. The Ghosthawk's advanced sensors had captured information that satellite surveillance had missed entirely. Hidden weapons systems, underground facilities, and technological capabilities that posed a direct threat to international security were all documented with incredible precision. The most significant discovery," General Morrison continued, "is that this facility represents just one component of a much larger network. The communication intercepts you gathered have led us to identify similar facilities in 3 other locations." Sarah realized that her mission hadn't just gathered intelligence about one facility. She had uncovered evidence of a coordinated, international threat that required immediate attention from the highest levels of government and military leadership. But the true significance of her accomplishment was about to become clear in a way she never could have anticipated. Later that morning, Sarah was walking across the base when she encountered Jake Thompson and Rick Owen near the flight line. They were preparing for a routine training mission, completely unaware of the extraordinary events that had taken place while they slept. Well, Jake said with his familiar condescending tone, "if it isn't our experimental aircraft enthusiast. Still playing with that weird little toy, Martinez?" Rick joined in with a smirk. "I heard you actually got permission to fly that thing. How did it feel to pilot a glorified science project?" Sarah felt a familiar surge of frustration, but this time it was tempered by the knowledge of what she had actually accomplished. Before she could respond, however, the conversation was interrupted by an unexpected arrival. Commander William Bradley, the base commander, was walking across the tarmac with several other senior officers. Sarah had rarely seen the commander outside of formal ceremonies, and his presence on the flight line was unusual enough to draw attention from everyone in the area. Commander Bradley was a legendary figure in military aviation, a pilot whose career spanned decades and included some of the most significant operations in recent military history. His reputation for tactical brilliance and calm leadership under pressure made him one of the most respected officers in the service. As the group of senior officers approached, Jake and Rick straightened their postures and prepared to render appropriate military courtesies. They clearly expected the commander to continue past them toward some important business elsewhere on the base. Instead, Commander Bradley stopped directly in front of Sarah, his expression serious but not unfriendly. The other officers formed a semicircle around them, creating an unmistakably formal atmosphere that drew curious glances from personnel throughout the area. "Captain Martinez," Commander Bradley said in a voice that carried clearly across the tarmac, "I wanted to personally thank you for the exceptional service you provided last night." Sarah felt her heart race as she realized where this conversation was heading. Jake and Rick were looking increasingly confused by the commander's attention to what they believed had been a routine training flight in an experimental aircraft. "Sir, I was just doing my duty," Sarah replied, maintaining proper military bearing despite her growing excitement about what was about to happen. Commander Bradley nodded approvingly. "Captain, what you accomplished last night represents one of the most successful intelligence operations this command has ever conducted. The information you gathered will have strategic implications at the highest levels of government." Jake and Rick exchanged bewildered glances. They clearly had no idea what the commander was talking about, but they were beginning to realize that Sarah's flight had been something far more significant than they had understood. "Furthermore," Commander Bradley continued, his voice carrying across the tarmac so that dozens of personnel could hear every word, "your performance validated the capabilities of an aircraft system that will revolutionize modern military operations. The commander paused for a moment, looking directly at Jake and Rick before continuing. I understand that some personnel have questioned Captain Martinez's choice of aircraft. Let me be clear about something, Commander. Bradley's voice took on a tone of absolute authority that made everyone within hearing distance pay careful attention to his next words. The aircraft that Captain Martinez flew last night isn't experimental. It isn't a toy. It isn't a science project. He paused for dramatic effect, his eyes scanning the assembled personnel. She took the Ghosthawk. The effect of those words was immediate and profound. Jake and Rick's expressions changed from confusion to shock to something approaching awe. The name Ghosthawk carried implications that even they couldn't ignore. This wasn't just any aircraft. This was something extraordinary. The Ghosthawk, Commander Bradley continued, represents the most advanced military aviation technology ever deployed. Last night, Captain Martinez used that aircraft to conduct a solo intelligence mission deep in hostile territory, gathering information that may prevent an international crisis. Sarah watched as the realization dawned on her fellow pilots. The aircraft they had mocked, the machine they had dismissed as worthless, was actually the most sophisticated and capable military aircraft in existence, and she had been chosen to fly it on one of the most important missions in recent history. Captain Martinez, Commander Bradley concluded, has demonstrated the courage, skill, and judgment that define the finest traditions of military aviation. Her success last night proves that she is exactly the kind of pilot this service needs for its most critical operations. As Commander Bradley and his entourage continued across the tarmac, Jake and Rick stood in stunned silence. The mockery and condescension that had characterized their attitude towards Sarah and her choice of aircraft had been completely shattered by the commander's revelation. Sarah felt a profound sense of vindication as she looked at her colleagues' shocked faces. Months of ridicule had been swept away in a single moment, replaced by the undeniable recognition that she had been right all along. The Ghosthawk wasn't just an experimental aircraft. It was the future of military aviation, and she had become its first operational pilot. The secret was out, and nothing would ever be the same again.